Are you stuck choosing a programming language to learn? Here's how I would personally go and choose a programming language today. Back when I first got into software, I had no idea what language I should really learn. I was in college at the time and we would use a lot of different languages. We'd use JavaScript, we'd use C++, we'd use C, we'd use Python, we'd use Java, and really it came down to just kind of understanding what those languages were and the ecosystem surrounding them. I also lived in Utah at the time, and Utah was what is known as a Java or a .NET shop state. And what that means is that all the jobs in my surrounding area were mostly using .NET, which is C#, or Java. These were mostly enterprise companies, and of course they used ecosystems that are more enterprise friendly. But there were a lot of different startup jobs which would be using JavaScript or even Python at the time. And so I think the first point is that you have to kind of understand what your end goal is when it comes down to learning a programming language and kind of the ecosystem around it. Is your goal to find a job, or is your goal to just use it personally? For me at the time, I wanted a job, and so I thought that my best bet was to stick in Java or even the C# land. So I took a bet and I learned a lot of Java. I did a lot of Android programming at the time, and then I also learned C# and I learned a lot of ASP.NET. Of course, this really worked out for me because I was able to find a job whenever I really wanted. Really, any company that I interviewed for, I would be able to land the job, even with no experience outside of college. And more or less, I really took a bet on those two programming languages, and it paid out. But what about today? There's way more languages and even larger ecosystems than there were 10 years ago. And I'd say it's the same thing. You got to think about your goals. What's your goal with regards to what language and ecosystem you're going to learn? For example, right now, the Python and JavaScript ecosystems are just exploding. But that also makes it a bit more competitive if you really think about it. Think about the type of job that you want. Do you want to work in an enterprise, or do you want to work for more of a startup? Think about the money as well. Where do you think the money will be? Is it going to be in a startup that's going to give you equity and a lower salary? Or is it going to be in an enterprise with really great benefits and a large salary? Think about the sustainability over the next 5 to 15 years. For example, the Java and the C# that I know today is largely unchanged from when I first learned it. And of course, the languages that I learned have evolved over time and added new features to the ecosystems, but they're largely the same. I can pick them up and be really productive whenever I need to. So there's another thing to think about, which is how fast do the platforms actually evolve? The JavaScript ecosystem always had this meme about there's always a new JavaScript framework or library invented every single day. As you may imagine, the learning curve could be quite steep if you have to learn something new every single week or every month or every single year. But this comes down to personal preference. There is so much cool stuff coming out of those ecosystems that's really exciting to learn and being part of. Also got to think about the simplicity of some of these languages and frameworks. Python today, you can do so much crazy stuff with just a few lines of code. And the question would be, is that a good thing or is that a bad thing? Personally, I think it's a great thing because I love using Python for the various side projects that I work on. But when it comes down to larger projects and projects I'll be working on over time, I really value the stable ecosystems that, say, .NET or Java provide. And the last thing I want to talk about, at least in this video, is kind of your career options within your languages and ecosystems. Depending on what you learn, there's going to be different opportunities. You got to think to yourself about the natural evolution of the different types of developers. For some ecosystems, you can use that language and frameworks for just about anything, especially like back-end development. This can give you a lot of stability where you can actually play around with whatever the client side or the front end is going to be. But there are definitely the cons of being pigeonholed into one thing. For example, you're not going to be able to know the big differences of what each tech does. Maybe you're a back-end developer and you know .NET and you know Node. What I mean by opportunities is that some of these languages and ecosystems have a lot of different platforms that you can actually target. JavaScript, Python, .NET, Java, they can all pretty much target every single platform. In other words, you can build web, desktop, and even mobile apps using any language, any framework. So really, it just becomes a question of preference rather than practicality. If you prefer JavaScript or TypeScript, go with that ecosystem. If you prefer Python for its simplicity, go with that ecosystem. If you like the robustness of enterprise-y type scenarios, then go with .NET or Java. This all really comes down to preference. And of course, that preference is just what you enjoy using. And there's so many surveys online that will tell you what people enjoy using today. People might say that TypeScript is awesome, or Rust is awesome, or .NET is awesome, or Java is awesome. And they'd be right because they enjoy using it. So really, this comes down to more of a supply and demand question at the end of the day. What is the demand for the various different types of developers using certain languages and frameworks, especially in your area or even remotely online? And now, what is the supply of those and how many people are being filled into those positions? You might have a lot more people diving into JavaScript and Python than they would be diving into C# or Java. Or you can even be more niche and do something like PHP or even Ruby. I think that there's a special importance of niching down as a developer, and I can speak personally on this. Sure, you can do what everyone else is doing, but you also have to know that you're going to be competing with everyone else. If you become a specialist in something and you really niche down to it, you'll become an authority in that space. So when people are looking for the JavaScript person who can do this, they might look for you. Or if they look for the Java person who can do that, they'll look for you. This doesn't have to stop at just niching down once. You can niche down more and more. You can be the certain framework person who knows all about the framework that is going to be used in a certain language. You might become the platform guru who knows everything about the platform with regards to that language ecosystem. Whatever it may be, the idea of niching down is usually a good one. But if your goal is to not really find a job and you're just kind of working for yourself, just choose what you really care about. But if you dive into something like freelancing, supply and demand is still a question that you need to answer. How many Python contracts are really out there? Compare that to Java or C#. Are there enough? How fast are they being filled? Is it really competitive to land those contracts? And you may even be in the camp of I don't really care. I just want a job or I want to build my own product. And so you should consider all these different types of questions that you need to bring answers to. Go look at the developer surveys, go see what's trending and what hasn't really changed in the last 10 years, and make a real investment into one of the languages. If you find that it's personally not working for you, you can always change. But niching down at the end of the day is going to be a good idea.